I should have known the world was never mine to claim. I had been born into it, into privilege, into a name that could break worlds. But in the end, it was the name that shattered me, not the other way around. I, Brielle Evren, was once a princess. Once? In a past life I had everything: wealth, influence, and the title of future queen of the grandest empire in the realm. My life had been perfect. Until it wasn't. They told me I was strong, that I would inherit a kingdom, and wear the crown with the elegance of my ancestors. But they never told me that the crown was a cage, one I would never escape from. That fateful night, when the world finally revealed itself to be the prison it was the night my life unraveled. I had been betrayed. The very people who raised me, who smiled and whispered sweet lies in my ear, my family, my kingdom, all conspired against me. They took everything I had built with years of loyalty and love, and they tore it down with a single sharp stroke. I remember the cold, the chill that crept through my veins as they stood there, accusing me of crimes I never committed. The accusation wasn't even important. What mattered was that they had finally removed the mask. They had decided that I, the princess, the heir, was no longer needed. "You are nothing," my cousin, Livia, sneered, her words cutting through the silence. "Your bloodline is a curse. The kingdom deserves a stronger queen." I was shackled, dragged through the halls of the palace I had once called home. The same halls where my laughter had echoed. Now, there was only silence. The once vibrant tapestries, the gilded walls, they felt empty, suffocating. I had always believed in my birthright, in the love of my father, King Edmund. But I learned too late that loyalty means nothing when there are bigger plans at play. The crown had been promised to me, yet I was cast aside like a discarded garment. And in my final moments I realized there is no loyalty in power. I woke up in a room that felt both strange and familiar. The scent of roses lingered in the air, mixed with the faint smell of old parchment. It was the same scent I had always known, but it didn't feel like home. I sat up, the soft silk of my bed covering me as I looked around. The room was mine. It had to be, but it wasn't. I was in my childhood room, the one I had left when I was 16, the room that had been locked away for years, the room that had haunted my nightmares after I was dethroned. The realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. I was back. Back before everything shattered. Before I lost everything, I was reborn. My heart raced, my breath short. It was as though the universe had given me a second chance. Or had it? Was this a punishment for all I had done in my previous life? Or was this an opportunity to fix the broken pieces of the world I had once ruled? I must be dreaming. I whispered to myself, but the weight of the room, the heavy silence that enveloped me, told me otherwise. I stood shakily from the bed and walked to the mirror. My reflection was the same, yet not. My eyes, once filled with naive hope, were now sharpened by something darker. The woman who stared back at me was no longer the princess I once was. This was a warrior, a survivor. I had been given a chance to rewrite my fate, to change the world that betrayed me. But how? What could I possibly do when I was trapped in the same royal cage, surrounded by the same poisonous faces? As I walked through the halls of the palace, memories hit me like a storm. The laughter of my younger self, the joy I felt when I had been crowned heir to the throne. I had believed my life was perfect, that the empire would flourish under my reign. But I had been so blind. I had trusted the wrong people. I had trusted them all. My cousin, Livia, had always been my rival. But she was nothing compared to my uncle, King Edmund's younger brother, Prince Reginald. He was the true puppet master behind my downfall. He had always wanted the throne, and when he saw that I was the heir, he knew the only way to take control was to destroy me. He turned my closest allies against me, made me out to be the villain, while he played the hero. And when they finally believed his lies, I was no longer the beloved princess. I was the enemy. But in this new world, I had the knowledge of everything that had transpired. I knew where the betrayals had come from. I knew the people who had whispered lies in my ear, and I knew the secret deals they had struck. But most importantly, I knew the weaknesses of everyone around me. If I was going to reclaim my birthright, I would need to play the game differently. I would need to take control of the throne, but not through force. I would need to use strategy, intelligence, and manipulation. I went to the royal court the next day. The throne room looked as majestic as ever, its towering columns, its gleaming floors. But the faces of the courtiers were different. The room was filled with people who didn't recognize me, people who had been part of the conspiracy. They would soon learn that Brielle Evren had returned. The moment I stepped into the room, all eyes turned to me. I could feel their judgment, their uncertainty. They didn't know what to make of me. Was I the same princess they had abandoned, or had I become something else? "Your Majesty," a voice called from the back. It was Lord Varen, a man who had betrayed me in my past life. He was the one who had helped Livia lock me away, making sure my fall from grace was complete. His voice was smooth, laced with mock politeness. I turned to face him, my heart steely. The power had shifted. It was no longer a game of playing by their rules. It was my turn to make the rules. "Lord Varen," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, "I believe you were the one who ordered my exile. Did you think I would stay gone forever?" The room fell silent. His face paled, but he quickly regained his composure. "Your Highness, you've been—" "Don't," I interrupted, stepping closer to him. "I've had enough of your lies." With each step I took toward the throne, I could feel the weight of the room pressing down on me. These were the same people who had watched me fall, but now it was their turn to kneel. They had to understand that I was no longer the naive princess. I reached the throne, slowly but surely. As I sat, I felt the throne shift beneath me, as though the world was ready to kneel to me once more. "I am the rightful heir," I declared, "and the world will soon learn to call me queen." Power does not come from the throne alone. It comes from the mind, from the ability to control the narrative, to twist the situation in your favor before anyone even realizes they've been played. They thought I was a puppet. They thought they had cut the strings. But they had only left me with time and a razor-sharp mind. Now that I was back in this world, in this palace that had once been my prison, I realized something crucial. I wasn't just Brielle Evren, the once crowned princess who had been overthrown. I was the queen of this empire now, whether they accepted it or not. When I sat on the throne again, I felt it, the weight of everything that came with it. The responsibility, the burden, the loneliness. The crown was not just a symbol of power, it was a reminder of how easily it could be taken from you. The very people I once trusted had thrown me into the abyss. But now, I had no choice but to embrace this power, to forge my own path. I wasn't naive anymore. I had learned the hard way that loyalty was fleeting, that trust was a luxury. The world was full of deceivers, of people who would smile in your face while plotting your downfall behind your back. I knew it was time to act, time to play the game they thought I had been too weak for. The royal court was a vast and intricate web of loyalties, secrets, and power plays. Each face in the room hid a story, a desire, a danger. The very air was thick with tension, and I could feel the eyes on me as I entered. I could feel the scrutiny, the anticipation of the courtiers who had watched my fall with satisfaction, now waiting to see how I would react to my sudden return. Livia, my cousin, stood at the far end of the room, her smile wide, yet cold. She had always been my rival, the one who coveted the crown I had once been promised. She had taken every opportunity to tear me down, to watch me fall, and now she was here, standing tall as though nothing had happened. But I could see the doubt in her eyes. She knew, just as I did, that everything was about to change. "Your Majesty," Livia said, her voice dripping with mock respect. "It's good to see you've returned. I'm sure we'll all be thrilled to hear how you plan to handle the duties of the throne." I didn't respond immediately. I didn't need to. The silence that followed was deafening. The courtiers were waiting for my reaction. But I had learned that silence was often the most powerful weapon. So, I let it hang in the air like a thick fog. When I finally spoke, my voice was calm, but the weight of my words was undeniable. "I've returned because this throne is mine. It was never yours to claim, Livia." Her eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "I suppose we'll see if the council agrees with that, won't we?" she said, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the other members of the court. After all, the council determines who sits on the throne, not just bloodline. I stood up, slowly walking toward the table where the council sat. Every step felt like an affirmation, a reclaiming of the power that had once been mine. The courtiers, who had once seen me as weak, now watched me with wary eyes. "The council will agree," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "They will agree because they will have no choice." I had made my first move, but now I needed to secure my position. It wasn't enough to just sit on the throne. I needed to secure the loyalty of those who held the true power. The council. The council was made up of powerful nobles, military leaders, and influential figures who controlled the wealth and resources of the kingdom. They had all turned their backs on me when I was overthrown, each one eager to keep their position while throwing me to the wolves. But now, I had a plan, one that would see me rise, not just as a figurehead, but as the true ruler of the kingdom. My first target was Lord Reginald, my uncle, and the mastermind behind my fall. He had been the one to orchestrate the plot, the one who had ensured that my father's will was altered, and I was removed from the line of succession. His ambition had no limits. But he was weak. He had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated me. I called for a private meeting with him. When he arrived, he looked at me with the same condescending smile I remembered from before. But this time, I wasn't the naive princess who would bow before him. This time, I was his queen, and I would make sure he knew it. "Uncle," I said, my voice cool, "you and I need to talk about the future of this kingdom." He raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Of course, Your Majesty. I've always been here to serve." I could hear the insincerity in his voice. He wasn't here to serve anyone but himself. But I wasn't interested in playing games. "You've served long enough, Uncle. And now, it's time for you to serve me." His face hardened as I spoke, but I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What are you suggesting, Isabel?" he asked, his tone wary. I leaned forward, my gaze never leaving his. "You've built your wealth, your power, on the backs of betrayal. But that ends now. I am the rightful queen, and if you want to keep your title, your land, and your wealth, you will bend the knee. You will support me, and together, we will rule. If not, I will take everything from you." He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw tight. And then, slowly, he nodded. "You've changed, Isabel," he muttered. "But I can see the fire in your eyes. I'll support you, for now." It was the first victory, but it was only the beginning. I had taken the first step towards securing the council's loyalty, but there were many more to go. As I continued to meet with the members of the council, I began to weave my web. I knew their weaknesses, I knew their desires, and I knew how to manipulate them. Each one of them had something to lose, whether it was power, wealth, or their reputation, and I knew how to use that against them. Some were easy to sway with promises of more land, others with the guarantee of military protection. Some needed more subtle moves, like blackmail. But I was prepared for it all. It wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about winning the war. As the days went on, I could feel the power shift. The court began to feel different. The whispers of rebellion that had once surrounded my name were now being replaced by words of support. The nobles who had once looked down on me were now showing signs of deference, their eyes now filled with a mixture of respect and fear. But there was one thing I knew for certain. There would always be those who sought to bring me down, who would see my rise as a threat to their own power. Isabel, my confidant, Serena, whispered one evening, "They will come for you soon. The other houses are restless. They don't like seeing a woman on the throne." I looked at her, my eyes cold. "Let them come," I replied. "I'll crush them before they even think of striking." In the Game of Thrones, trust is an illusion. Power is the only reality. When I took the throne, I knew it wasn't the end of my journey. It was only the beginning. The court was still filled with those who saw me as a usurper, a woman unfit to rule. But they didn't understand one simple truth. The crown doesn't belong to the strongest. It belongs to the one who outlasts the storms, who can manipulate the forces of power until their enemies tear themselves apart. And I wasn't about to let them destroy me. Now that I had the throne, I needed to secure my position, not just within the walls of the palace but across the kingdom. The nobility would not just sit idly by and watch me rule. There would be opposition, and I had to make sure I was prepared for it. It began with a whisper, a rumor that traveled through the court like wildfire, igniting the first real challenge to my reign. House Garon, the second most powerful noble house in the kingdom, had always had a cold relationship with my family. They had never been allies, and their ambitions were legendary. But the Garon family had always respected the Evren dynasty, at least until now. The head of House Garon, Lord Renard, was an ambitious man, one who had always dreamed of having a daughter take the throne. With my rise, his dreams had been dashed, and he wasn't going to accept it without a fight. One evening, as I sat in my private chambers, the door opened without a knock. It was Serena, my most trusted advisor, her expression tense. "Madam, House Garon is making a move," she said, closing the door behind her. "Lord Renard has sent word to the other houses. He's gathering support for a rebellion." I stood, my heart pounding, not out of fear, but of anticipation. I had known this day would come. "Let him," I replied coldly, turning to the window. "Let him gather his allies. But he's forgotten one thing: I don't lose battles." Serena raised an eyebrow. "You're not afraid?" she asked. "Fear is a weakness," I said firmly, "and I've learned not to show it." The days that followed were filled with careful planning. I couldn't afford to take this threat lightly, even if it came from a family as weak as House Garon. Lord Renard may have been ambitious, but his arrogance blinded him to his own weaknesses. I knew that House Garon would rely on their military strength to make their move. They had an army of well-trained soldiers, and their borders were well fortified. I couldn't match them man to man, but I didn't need to. I would outwit them. I began to form alliances with the smaller houses, those that had been neglected by the old regime, houses that had nothing to lose and everything to gain by supporting me. They weren't the strongest, but they were loyal, and loyalty was far more powerful than an army. One of the first houses I reached out to was House Valor, a family with a stronghold near the southern border. Their leader, Lady Seraphine, had always been a shrewd political player, and I knew she would appreciate my strategy. She was also widowed and without children, which made her the perfect ally, free from any ties that could make her a potential rival. "Madame Lin," she said, receiving me in her opulent estate. "I hear you've claimed the throne, but House Garon will never bend the knee. You'll need more than words to prove yourself." I looked her in the eyes, unflinching. "And that's why I'm here," I replied. "I have a proposal, a marriage alliance. You and I will stand together, and the others will follow." She raised an eyebrow, intrigued but cautious. "You offer me your daughter's hand?" she asked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "I offer you the power to ensure your future. Together we can bring down House Garon and secure our dynasties for the long term." She hesitated, but then nodded slowly. Lady Seraphine understood the gravity of what I was offering. We would be an unassailable force if we worked together. As the weeks passed, I continued to build alliances with the other houses. Meanwhile, Lord Renard was making his move, gathering support from his allies, and preparing his army for an open conflict. The whispers of war spread across the kingdom, but I was determined to handle this without bloodshed if I could. One morning, an unexpected letter arrived, a letter from Lord Renard himself. It was a formal invitation to meet with him in the Garden of the Ancients, a neutral ground outside the city. At first I was hesitant, but I knew this was a game of words, of diplomacy, and I wasn't about to shy away from it. The day of the meeting arrived, and I rode to the appointed location with a small entourage of trusted guards. The garden was beautiful but cold, silent except for the rustle of the leaves in the wind. Lord Renard was already there, standing with his back to me, looking out over the distant horizon. When he turned to face me, His eyes were full of calculation. His clothes were of the finest fabric, his posture regal. He was trying to mask the nervousness I knew was there. "Madame Lin," he said with a bow. "I see you've arrived. I'd like to offer a truce." I crossed my arms, waiting for him to continue. "You and I both know that the throne is mine by right, but I am a reasonable man," he said smoothly. "If you step down and acknowledge my rule, I will spare your life. You'll keep your title, perhaps even a small village to govern." I chuckled, though it was not out of amusement. It was a test to see how far he would go. "How generous of you," I said. "But I'm afraid you overestimate your position, Lord Renard. I will sit on this throne, and I will keep it. Your offer is meaningless." His eyes flashed with frustration, but he remained composed. "Then you will force me to take it by force, won't you?" he asked, his tone laced with menace. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "I am not here to negotiate with a weakling. You may think you have the power, but you forget one thing. I control the future, Lord Renard, and the future will not have you in it." The silence between us was thick, heavy. The tension was palpable. The following days were filled with quiet preparations. I had no intention of going to war with Lord Renard, not if I could avoid it. Instead, I turned his own people against him. The lords and ladies of House Garon were not as loyal as he believed. Through whispers, through small manipulations, I planted seeds of doubt. I exposed the weaknesses in Renard's plans, subtly encouraging the houses who were undecided. Some of them, desperate for power, quickly saw the benefit of supporting me. Before Renard could even muster his forces, I had already turned his allies into traitors. One by one, his support base crumbled. It didn't take long for Renard to realize that he had been outplayed. His rebellion was over before it started. Power is not won in a single battle. It is claimed through strategy, loyalty, and ruthlessness. The throne I had once been promised, the one that had been ripped away from me, was now within my grasp. But I knew that holding it wasn't just about defeating my enemies. It was about securing the kingdom, maintaining the illusion of peace, and most importantly, ensuring that no one would ever challenge my reign again. And so, as I sat upon the throne, the weight of the crown not just pressing against my brow, but against my very soul, I understood the immense responsibility I had inherited. It was no longer just about power. It was about control, and control came with sacrifices. The first order of business after securing House Garon's defeat was to ensure that the rest of the noble houses understood that I was no longer the young princess they once knew. I wasn't going to be the docile pawn they had once assumed. I was the queen, and they would bend the knee or face consequences. The court was filled with tension. The courtiers, those who had once whispered behind my back, now watched me carefully. They were cautious, knowing that I had the power to destroy them with a single word. But some of them still hoped they could manipulate me, still believed I could be swayed by their promises. Lord Malvin, a seasoned courtier who had always been a snake in the shadows, tried to approach me with flattery. He was a man with many alliances, but few true friends. "Your Majesty," Lord Malvin said, bowing deeply before me, his voice laced with insincerity. "It is a pleasure to see you claim what was rightfully yours. The kingdom will surely flourish under your guidance." I didn't respond right away. I studied him, the thin line of his lips, the way his eyes shifted uneasily. This was a man who had been too comfortable in his manipulations. "Lord Malvin," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a dagger. "You were among those who betrayed me, were you not?" His face went pale, but he quickly masked it with a laugh. "Madam, the past is behind us. I was simply trying to ensure that the kingdom was not left in chaos. We all do what we must to survive." I stared at him, my gaze piercing through the pretense. "You do what you must to survive. But you forget one thing, Lord Malvin," I said coldly. "Survival does not mean loyalty." I stood, walking slowly around the table where he knelt. The silence was thick. Every eye in the room was trained on us. "You've already shown your hand," I continued. You cannot be trusted. I will not tolerate your games. So, here is my offer. You leave this court and return to your estate in the Northern Territories. And you do it quietly, or I will make sure your estate is taken from you." His breath caught in his throat, but he didn't dare argue. I could see the defeat in his eyes. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of power. The court watched in silence as he stood and left, his pride shattered. I had just sent a message to the entire court. Loyalty was not a commodity, it was earned. And I would never hesitate to remove anyone who dared to test my rule. The battle for control of the throne was not just within the walls of the palace. It was being fought in the shadows, among the great houses that had once supported my family. With House Garon weakened, the next challenge came from House Valor, led by the cunning and ambitious Lord Seraphin Valor. Seraphin had always been an ally to my father, but after my fall, he had quickly turned to Livia, hoping to secure his own position as a powerful noble. He had seen the kingdom's power as a moving tide, and he'd bet on the wrong horse. I knew that House Valor still held power, though not as much as they had once claimed. Their territory was vast, and they controlled a portion of the military. But they were fractured. The young Seraphine, Lord Seraphin's sister, had always been loyal to my family, and I knew her affection for me would be my secret weapon. I sent a personal letter to Seraphine, inviting her to the palace under the guise of a friendly visit. What she didn't know was that I had already sent a message to Lord Seraphin, one that would test his loyalty. I knew that if he tried anything, he would be forced into a corner with no way out. The council meeting was to take place 2 days later, and this time I had made sure that it would be different. The room would no longer be filled with menacing smiles and quiet whispers. It would be filled with fear, respect, and understanding. I had already ensured that the smaller houses would be on my side, and now it was time to make sure the rest understood where their allegiances should lie. I walked into the council room, a quiet storm of power and confidence. Lord Seraphin stood in the center, speaking with Lord Harvin of House Merrick, his face full of pride. But when he saw me enter, that pride faltered. He could see the change in me, the shift that had occurred since I first took the throne. "Your Majesty," Lord Seraphin said, bowing in his usual manner. "It is good to see you in such good health. The kingdom is pleased to see a strong queen once again." I smiled thinly, a cold edge to my words. And yet, the kingdom was not pleased when I was thrown aside for the likes of Livia, I said softly, letting the words sink in. "But we are not here to discuss the past. We are here to ensure that the future of this kingdom is secure." I turned to the council. "We are on the verge of great change. There are those who would seek to tear us apart, to weaken our position. But let me be clear, I will never allow this kingdom to fall into the hands of the weak or the disloyal." I could see Lord Seraphin's jaw tighten. He was no fool. He knew I was speaking to him. He had been playing both sides, thinking he could secure his position by bending the will of the court. But he was wrong. I had already set my trap. By the time the meeting concluded, Seraphin had learned the true cost of crossing me. I had secretly gathered evidence of his dealings with Livia, his covert meetings with the nobles who sought to undermine my reign. The documents were subtle but damning. When I had the council review them, his facade shattered. "Lord Seraphin," I said coldly, as the room filled with tension, "your loyalty has been questioned. I suggest you make a choice. The throne is mine, and no amount of scheming will change that." Seraphin's face drained of color, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. The power I had claimed was now undeniable. "You cannot do this." Seraphin spat, his voice rising. "You will not get away with this, Isabel." "Watch me," I replied, my voice calm and controlled. "Your house has been removed from the council. You will leave the capital by tomorrow morning, and you will never return." I could see the rage in his eyes, but it was useless. He had no more allies. His power had cracked, and with it, so did his house's influence. As Seraphin was escorted from the room, I turned to the council. The room was silent. There was no more doubt. The court was now mine. "This is your final warning," I said to the remaining members of the council. "I will not tolerate betrayal. You will support me, or you will be removed." The room bowed, and I knew in that moment that I'd secured the kingdom. Power is not a thing to be grasped from the world. It is forged in the deepest of fires, molded by the hands of those who are willing to make the hardest choices. It is earned, not taken. And I, Brielle Evren, had earned every inch of my throne. The days following the fall of Lord Seraphim were quieter than I anticipated. For the first time, the court was still, everyone waiting for the next move. The nobles who had once been indifferent or openly hostile were now on edge, their loyalty hanging in the balance. Despite the temporary calm, I could feel the currents beneath the surface. The kingdom wasn't just fractured within the palace, it was vulnerable. Other houses, sensing opportunity, would begin to circle like vultures, waiting for their moment to strike. While my control over the throne was secure, I had yet to secure the heart of the kingdom, the military, the common people, and the distant lands that were held by powerful, often unruly nobles. This was the most dangerous phase of the game. My first step was to address the military. The kingdom's forces were strong, but they were loyal to whoever held the most influence, and right now, that wasn't me. The commanders, the generals who had once been aligned with my father's rule, had begun to question my legitimacy. They had fought for my father and, by extension, his heir, but the situation had changed. I needed to cement their loyalty before another conflict erupted. General Eric, a towering man with a reputation for unshakable loyalty, had been my father's most trusted military leader. His loyalty had always been unquestionable, but with the throne now in my hands, I needed to remind him of where his true allegiance lay. I requested a private audience with him. As the doors to the private chambers closed behind us, I stood, looking out at the vast palace grounds. The crisp air filled the room, and for a moment, we stood in silence. "General Eric," I said, my voice steady, "you served my father with honor, and I do not doubt your dedication to this kingdom. But I need to hear from you now. Where do your loyalties lie?" Eric stood across from me, his face impassive. His expression gave nothing away. For a moment, I wondered if he would break, if his allegiance was still in question. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice low, "my loyalty lies with the crown, and I will follow whoever holds it." I turned to face him, meeting his gaze. "You are loyal to the crown," I repeated, slowly, "but not to the bloodline. You've been loyal to my father. You do not yet know if you will be loyal to me." There was a flicker in his eyes, a quiet understanding. He had never questioned my father's reign because my father had always commanded respect. But I was no longer a princess. I was the queen, and my legacy would be forged by my own hands. "General," I said, moving closer to him, "this kingdom is on the edge of a precipice. If we do not stand united, the kingdom will fall into chaos. If you stand with me, I will give you my trust, and I will ensure that this kingdom remains strong. Do you understand?" His gaze softened, and for the first time, I saw the respect he had once given my father reflected in his eyes for me. "I understand, Your Majesty," he said, his voice firm. "I will stand with you." While General Eric's loyalty was secured, the next phase of my strategy was more delicate, the nobility of the outer territories. The northern lands, the coastal provinces, and the southern duchies were still controlled by houses that had their own agendas, their own interests. If I was to keep the kingdom intact, I needed to make alliances with these houses, some willing, others reluctant. The first step was to meet with House Arden, a powerful house in the southern lands, notorious for their mercantile empire. The head of the house, Lord Isidore Arden, was a man known for his ruthlessness in business and his cold calculations in politics. He wasn't a man who trusted easily, but I knew that his loyalty could buy me control over the southern trade routes, which were critical for the kingdom's prosperity. I traveled to House Arden's stronghold, a massive estate nestled on the edge of a cliff overlooking the stormy seas. The air was damp, and the winds howled as my carriage approached the towering gates of the estate. Lord Isidore was waiting at the door, his expression as cold as the weather. "Your Majesty," Lord Isidore said with a small bow, but his tone was anything but deferential. "What brings the Queen to my humble estate?" I dismounted my horse and stepped forward. My voice was unwavering as I spoke. "I've come to ensure that the South remains loyal to me. You may have once sided with Livia's faction, but the time for pretenses is over. The kingdom is mine, and your position in it depends on your loyalty." His eyes flickered for just a moment, but he quickly masked the surprise with a calculating smile. "And what do you offer in return, Your Majesty?" he asked, clearly testing me. I stood my ground, meeting his gaze. "I offer you control of the southern trade routes, of the markets, and of the resources you've long coveted. In return, you will swear unwavering loyalty to the crown." He took a long pause before speaking again, as if weighing the pros and cons of the situation. "And what happens to those who refuse to swear loyalty?" "They fall," I said bluntly. "I do not deal with traitors, Lord Arden." The room was silent, as I let the threat hang in the air. Finally, Lord Isidore bowed his head. "Very well, Your Majesty. I will support you. The South will stand with you." It was the first true victory in securing the heart of the kingdom. As the alliances began to solidify, I knew that there would be those who would continue to resist. Some would bow, but others would strike in the shadows, trying to undermine me, trying to see me fall. There were whispers, rebellions, but they were not yet fully formed. In the distance, I could feel the growing tension. War was on the horizon. The question was not whether I would fight back, but how I would fight. The northern houses, most notably House Varick, would likely rally behind a rival claimant. I had already heard rumors that Livia, my cousin, who had once been the queen in the eyes of the people, was gaining traction with the northern lords. But I had already set my trap. Livia had no idea what she was walking into. Before I left House Arden, I issued one last message to my enemies. The news of my growing alliances spread across the kingdom like wildfire, and I ensured that every noble knew what awaited them if they dared challenge me. I sent a personal letter to Lord Berwick, the head of House Varick, warning him that any attempt to oppose my rule would not only mean his ruin but the destruction of his house. The letter was simple, but it carried a weight that would not be ignored. To Lord Berwick Varick, the throne is no longer in question. You would do well to remember this before making any reckless decisions. The crown is mine, and I will defend it at any cost. A Queen Brielle Evren. To rule a kingdom is not to sit comfortably upon a throne. It is to stand alone, to face every challenge head-on, and to sacrifice what is needed to remain unbroken. The price of power is never paid in gold, it is paid in blood, and sometimes the blood that must be spilled is your own. The kingdom I had once loved had grown quiet, but beneath the surface, the seeds of rebellion were beginning to sprout. The nobles who had once supported me were starting to whisper again, their loyalty no longer as steadfast as it had been. And, as if that were not enough, Livia, the cousin I had once considered a sister, was amassing power in the north. Her supporters were loyal, but misguided, and they had not yet learned what I was capable of. The whispers began quietly at first. Rumors spread from the northern territories, from the lands where House Varick ruled. Lord Berwick, head of the powerful northern family, was the first to openly challenge me. His alliance with Livia was no surprise. He had always sought power for his house, and Livia offered it to him on a silver platter. But it was more than just a desire for power that fueled Livia's actions. It was betrayal, a need to prove that she was the rightful queen, not me. She had never forgiven me for being born the crown princess. She had always been jealous, always bitter at the affection my father had given me. And now, with her supporters in the north rallying behind her, Livia sought to undo everything I had built. I could feel the tension building in the air. The nobles whispered, and their words, once supportive, had turned into doubt. And yet, as much as I felt their disdain, I was no longer the princess they had abandoned. I was the queen, and I had no intention of backing down. The first letter arrived in the middle of the night. A scroll sealed with House Varick's sigil. I broke the seal and unfurled the parchment, reading its contents with a cold fury. To Queen Isabel, the Northern Territories no longer recognize your rule. The throne is for the strong, and it is clear you are no longer fit to wear the crown. House Varick stands with Livia, and we demand your abdication. Refuse, and we will claim what is rightfully ours. And Lord Berwick Varick, House Varick, I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling my anger build. This was not just a challenge to my authority. This was a declaration of war. I slammed the letter down on the table, my hands trembling with barely contained rage. The audacity, the sheer disrespect. But I had been prepared for this. I had seen it coming. The days after the letter arrived were filled with careful planning. I could not afford to act in haste. While Livia gathered her forces in the north, I would gather mine in the south. I would not let her take the kingdom without a fight. I turned to my most trusted advisor, Serena, the woman who had helped me plan my rise to power. She had proven her loyalty in countless ways. And now, I needed her more than ever. "Serena," I said, my voice steady but carrying the weight of the situation, "we need to act quickly. Livia's rebellion cannot be allowed to gain ground." She nodded, her face grim. "We will need to secure the loyalty of the southern houses, and make sure that the military remains aligned with you. But we also need to gather information from the north. We cannot let Livia surprise us." I turned to the map of the kingdoms spread before us. The northern territories were well fortified, their forces strong. But the south, where my allies were strongest, could be the key to securing the kingdom. "I'll send word to House Arden and House Valor," I said, tapping the map. "If I can rally them, we will have the numbers we need. But we need to do this quickly." Serena stood and moved to the side, giving me space to think. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me. The first step was securing my alliances. Without them, I would be nothing. 3 days later, I stood at the gates of House Arden, the cold wind whipping through the air as I prepared to meet with Lady Seraphine Arden. She was an ally who had pledged her support when I first reclaimed the throne, but I needed her now more than ever. Seraphine had always been a shrewd and intelligent woman, more than capable of understanding the stakes at play. When I arrived at her estate, the gates opened, and she greeted me with a respectful bow. "Your Majesty," she said, her eyes studying me carefully. "I know why you've come. I'm with you, but we need to be careful. House Varrick's army is not to be underestimated." I met her gaze and nodded. She was right. House Varrick had a formidable military presence, but I had something they didn't: loyalty. If I could gain the trust of the right houses, I would have an army strong enough to destroy any rebellion. "We will fight this together," I said firmly. "I need your full support. Together, we will ensure that Livia's rebellion never succeeds." Back in the capital, I knew time was running out. The nobility was growing restless. Whispers of rebellion were everywhere, and as the days passed, the situation grew more tense. The nobles of the court, those who still hesitated, needed to be reminded of their place. I called a meeting with the remaining factions of the court, the lords and ladies who had once pledged their loyalty to me. They needed to understand that there would be no more games. If they sided with Livia, they would find themselves on the wrong side of history. "The rebellion in the north is not just an act of betrayal," I began, standing before them in the Grand Council Hall. "It is a direct attack on the crown and on everything we've built. You will either stand with me, or you will stand against me." I let the silence linger as I watched their expressions shift. Fear, doubt, but above all, respect. They knew that if they sided with me, they would be on the winning side. But if they hesitated, they would lose everything. "Your loyalty is what will keep you safe," I continued. "Stand with me now, and I will reward you. Stand against me, and you will regret it." The room was quiet, as the nobles exchanged nervous glances. In that moment, I saw their hesitation dissolve. They knew the power was mine now. They knew that Livia was just a puppet, and I was the true queen. Within days, the first reports came in. House Varrick was on the move. Their armies were marching south, their forces led by Lord Barrick himself. But they underestimated me. They did not realize that while they were preparing for war, I was preparing for peace. Peace through strength. I had already assembled my own army, led by General Eric and the loyal commanders of the southern forces. We moved swiftly, positioning ourselves along the northern borders. Lady Seraphine Arden had already begun gathering support from her own forces, and we would strike before House Varrick could reach the capital. As the battle loomed closer, The weight of everything I had fought for settled on my shoulders. This was not just a fight for the throne. This was a fight for my legacy, for the future of my kingdom. The night before the battle, I stood alone in the royal gardens, looking out at the moonlit horizon. The kingdom I had once believed was mine was now in my hands, and I would hold it. I would never let anyone take it from me again. Tomorrow, we would face Livia's rebellion head-on, and tomorrow, I would win. The battlefield is not just a place where blood is spilled. It is the arena where the future is decided, where the strong are tested and the weak are exposed. And in the Game of Thrones, only the ruthless survive. When I took the throne, I knew it would not be given easily. But I never imagined that it would take a war to secure it. The rebellion from the north was no longer just a whispered rumor. It was now a full-fledged crisis, with Lord Beric leading the charge against me, and my cousin, Livia, pulling the strings from the shadows. The time had come to face them. The battle for the throne would be fought in blood, in loyalty, and in cunning. The days leading up to the battle felt like an eternity. I had spent hours in the war room, poring over strategies with General Eric and my most trusted commanders. We were outnumbered. House Varric's forces were large, well-equipped, and had the advantage of familiar terrain. But we had something they did not. We had the element of surprise and the loyalty of our people. I couldn't sleep the night before the battle. I sat alone in my private chambers, staring at the map of the kingdom. The cool night air flowed in through the open window, but it did nothing to calm the fire inside me. The flames of revenge, of resolve, and of fury that had been building since the day they tore my kingdom away from me. I had to win this. There was no other choice. If I failed, I would lose everything again. The people, my family, and my birthright would slip through my fingers. I looked at the silver crown resting on the table beside me, the symbol of my authority. It gleamed in the moonlight, as though it was waiting for the battle that would legitimize it once and for all. "Your Majesty?" Serena's voice broke through my thoughts, soft but steady. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. She had been with me since the beginning, and I knew that whatever happened next, she would stand by my side. "You look troubled, my queen," she said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. I nodded slowly, standing to meet her gaze. "I'm not worried about the outcome, Serena," I said, my voice low. "I'm worried about what comes after. If we win, if I claim the throne, will we be ready to rebuild what's been broken?" Serena walked toward me and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You have already won, Your Majesty," she said firmly. "Now you just need to claim what is yours. The kingdom is behind you. The future is yours to shape." Her words grounded me. The fight ahead would be brutal, but I was no longer the scared princess of my past. I was the queen who had reclaimed her kingdom and would never let go of it again. The morning of the battle arrived. I stood in the courtyard, dressed in the armor of a queen, not the silk robes of a princess, but the hardened armor of a ruler who knew what it meant to lead her people into war. The ground was wet, the air crisp and sharp with the promise of violence. My army was ready. Every soldier, from the high-ranking generals to the common foot soldiers, knew that today would decide the future of the kingdom. It was more than just a fight for the throne. It was a fight for survival. As I walked toward the battlefield, my generals stood by my side. General Eric, with his sharp eyes and even sharper strategies, looked at me with respect. He had always been loyal, but today, he was more than a general. Today, he was the key to our victory. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing his head. "The army is ready. We've placed our best men at the front. The northern forces won't see it coming." I nodded, scanning the horizon. House Varric's forces were positioned across the valley, their banners flying in the wind. They were confident, as they should be. They had underestimated me, us. "We will win this battle," I said coldly, my voice cutting through the tension. "But we must be swift. We will strike when they least expect it." The battle began with the roar of war horns echoing across the valley. My forces, though smaller, were fierce and determined. We didn't fight for territory or for personal gain. We fought for something much greater, the future of our kingdom, of the people who had always supported me. The sound of clashing swords, the pounding of hooves, and the war cries of my men filled the air as the two armies collided. The battlefield became a chaotic mess of bodies, armor, and blood. The clang of steel was deafening, and the earth shook beneath our feet. I fought alongside my men, wielding a sword that had once belonged to my father. It felt right in my hands. I had never been trained in warfare, but today I was as much a warrior as any man on the field. I could see Lord Beric in the distance, leading his forces from the front. His expression was one of fierce determination, but even from here, I could see the doubt in his eyes. He knew, as I did, that this battle would determine more than just our fates. It would define the future of the entire kingdom. "Forward! Push them back!" I shouted to my men, my voice carried by the wind. The soldiers around me surged forward, a wave of iron and fire. The battle raged for hours. There were moments when I thought we might lose, when the enemy pushed forward with terrifying force. But every time I felt the doubt creeping in, I remembered why I was here. I remembered the people who depended on me and the future I was fighting for. In the distance, I saw Livia, her face cold, her eyes filled with rage as she watched the battle unfold. She had never been the queen I was meant to be, and now she would see that the kingdom would never be hers. "Livia," I called, my voice carrying across the battlefield. "You have lost. Surrender now." She turned to face me, her face twisted in defiance. "I will never surrender to you, Isabel," she shouted, her voice carrying the weight of a broken ambition. But I knew I had already won. As the day wore on, my forces began to gain ground. House Varric's army, despite their numbers, was fractured. They didn't know where to turn, and that's when I gave the signal. "Now," I shouted. "Push them back!" The hidden forces I had positioned around the battlefield surged forward. We had cut off their escape routes, trapped them like rats in a cage. Lord Beric's forces began to break, his soldiers turning on him as chaos erupted among their ranks. It wasn't long before Lord Beric himself was forced to retreat. I saw him near the edge of the battlefield, his armor battered, his face twisted with rage and frustration. "You are finished," I muttered to myself as I watched him retreat into the distance. The battle ended with a final, thunderous charge. House Varric had lost. Their rebellion had crumbled, and with it, their hope of ever taking the throne. The air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke. The battlefield was strewn with the bodies of the fallen, both my enemies and my men. The cries of the wounded filled the air, and the silence that followed was deafening. But as I stood, victorious, I knew that the hardest part was yet to come. Lord Beric had fled, but he would not be forgotten. House Varric would never recover from this defeat, and Livia, her rebellion crushed, would have no choice but to accept that her claim to the throne was no more. But this victory wasn't just mine. It was the kingdom's. The people would now see that I was no longer the broken princess they once abandoned. I was their queen, and I had proven that nothing would take the crown from me. I turned to my soldiers, who had fought bravely by my side. They were the ones who had made this victory possible. "We won today," I said, my voice ringing out over the battlefield. "This kingdom belongs to us. Together, we will build a future. Power is not merely about ruling, it's about building something that lasts. It's about transforming what was broken into something stronger than it ever was before." But even as I basked in the victory of the battlefield, I knew that the real work had only just begun. The reign of a queen does not end with a battle. It begins with the reconstruction of the people, the lands, and the very soul of the kingdom. The battlefield had been silent for hours after the fighting ceased. The cries of the wounded, the cries of the dead, still echoed in the wind. I had seen many battles in my past life, but nothing prepared me for the brutality of seeing the kingdom I had once cherished torn apart in the name of rebellion. But even as I walked through the aftermath, I understood this was not just the end of a war. It was the beginning of a new reign, one forged by the fires of conflict. In the days following the battle, I had the bodies of the fallen buried with honor. The defeated soldiers of House Varric were stripped of their armaments and sent back to the northern territories to await the final judgment. Lord Beric, The head of the house had fled, but his fate was sealed. My kingdom needed healing, and for that healing, I would need to take the first steps of strength and mercy. I stood at the balcony of the palace, gazing at the city below, where the echoes of the rebellion still lingered in the streets. The citizens, those who had supported me, those who had been deceived, they all needed to see that this kingdom would stand strong, not only in war, but in peace. After a war, it is not enough to claim victory. You must secure your position and build trust. The kingdom had been fractured by rebellion, betrayal, and lies. Now, it was my job to put the pieces back together. My first task was to call upon the nobles, those who had remained neutral during the battle, those who had supported Livia or Lord Beric. They would have to understand that their place in this kingdom depended on their loyalty. They would kneel, or they would face the consequences. I summoned a meeting of the High Council, which consisted of the most influential nobles from across the kingdom. They had been my father's council, but now they would serve me. The room was filled with tension as I entered, my presence commanding attention. The faces of the nobles were wary, some fearful, others hopeful. They were uncertain of their place in this new world, and I had to show them that there was no middle ground. I walked to the center of the room, my eyes scanning the assembly. At the far end of the hall, Lord Malvin sat, his usual smug smile absent. He had witnessed my rise from princess to queen, and now he would see the full extent of my power. "Nobles of the kingdom," I began, my voice cold and unwavering, "we stand at a crossroads. The rebellion that threatened to tear us apart has been defeated. House Varick is broken. Livia's claim is no more. But the damage done to this kingdom will take more than a battle to heal. It will take unity, loyalty, and those who cannot swear loyalty to this crown will not be welcome in this realm." The room was silent. I could feel the weight of the words settling over them like a storm cloud. Some of them were already regretting their earlier alliances. They saw the power in my eyes, and they understood the price of defiance. "You have a choice," I continued, my voice rising with authority. "You can bend the knee and support my reign, or you can leave. There will be no more whispers, no more games. If you are with me, you will stay. If not, your houses will fall with your rebellion." The silence in the room stretched on. Then Lord Seraphin from House Valor, a man once skeptical of my rule, stood. "Your Majesty," he said, his voice hesitant, "you have proven your strength. We are with you." One by one, the other nobles stood, pledging their support. It wasn't just for the crown. It was because they knew that a queen who had won the battle and crushed rebellion would be a force to be reckoned with. I had won their loyalty, but now the real work began. After the council meeting, I turned my attention to the heart of the kingdom, the people. They were the lifeblood of the realm, and their support would be the cornerstone of my reign. I visited the markets, the towns, and the villages. The citizens needed to see me, to know that I was not just a ruler behind walls, but a queen who walked among them. I greeted the children who ran alongside me, the farmers whose fields had been ravaged by the war, and the merchants who had lost everything in the chaos. I knew that winning the people's loyalty would take time, but I was willing to spend every moment I could to show them that I would rebuild the kingdom they loved. The lands were in need of restoration, but more than that, they needed to see that justice would be done. One of the first steps in rebuilding the kingdom was securing the military. General Eric, who had been my most loyal commander, was tasked with restructuring the army. I couldn't afford to have a divided military. The remnants of Lord Beric's forces were still scattered across the northern territories, and I needed to ensure that my own army would remain loyal and strong. General Eric and I met in the war room, where the maps of the kingdom were spread out before us. "Your Majesty," Eric began, his voice steady, "we've already begun recruiting new soldiers, but we need to prepare for the long term. We can't afford to let House Varrick's remnants regroup. We'll need to reinforce our borders and ensure that there are no pockets of resistance." I nodded, my mind already turning toward the future. "We'll begin by fortifying the northern borders," I said. "But I want to ensure that the men we recruit are loyal. We cannot afford another betrayal. We'll need to establish loyalty through trust and discipline." Eric agreed, and the army was soon restructured into a force that could defend the kingdom from both internal and external threats. The soldiers under my command would not just be warriors, they would be the guardians of the realm. As the weeks passed, I began to see the fruits of my labor. The kingdom, though scarred by war, began to heal. The people rallied behind me, their loyalty earned through my actions, not just my words. But the price of my reign was clear. Every victory, every alliance, had come at a cost. My enemies had been crushed, but there was a lingering emptiness inside me that I couldn't shake. The weight of leadership was not just in conquering, it was in the sacrifices you made to keep the kingdom intact. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome, but I had learned that power was not just about taking the throne. It was about maintaining it, about knowing when to fight and when to yield. As I looked out over the palace grounds, I knew that the road ahead would be long, but for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I was queen, and no one would ever take that from me. Power, I had learned, is a fragile thing. It is fleeting. It slips through the fingers like water, only to be crushed by the weight of time and betrayal. But a legacy, a true legacy, is built to endure. And that was exactly what I needed to focus on now. After all, I was not just Isabel Evren, the woman who had reclaimed the throne. I was Queen Isabel, the ruler who would ensure that my kingdom, our kingdom, endured. The war was over and the rebellion had been quashed. Yet the work didn't end with the surrender of my enemies. The kingdom lay in ruins, not just in the physical sense, but in its very soul. The people needed reassurance. The nobility needed to see that I would not just reign, I would build. I called a meeting with the common people, something my father had rarely done. It was time to show them that my rule was not one of fear, but one of hope. I stood before a crowd in the capital, the cobblestones beneath me still stained by the remnants of past conflict. I looked out at them, farmers, tradespeople, soldiers, beggars, and I saw the hope that had begun to bloom again. The air was thick with expectation. "People of the kingdom," I said, my voice ringing out, carrying over the crowd. "The days of war are behind us. But our kingdom is not just a kingdom of rulers, it is a kingdom of citizens, of men and women who make it strong with their labor and their love." The crowd stirred, and I could feel the energy rising. This was the moment when I would show them that I was not just a queen in name, but in action. We will rebuild together. The wealth of the land will be shared. The land will be yours to farm, the rivers yours to fish. The taxes will be fair, and corruption will not take root in this kingdom again. The crowd erupted into applause. I had made the first step toward building trust, toward showing that I was the queen who would lead them to prosperity. The council room, once filled with fear and scheming, now felt different. The nobles, once divided and self-serving, now sat at attention, waiting for me to speak. Their faces reflected both the respect they had for my victory and the wariness that I knew would linger. I had spent the past weeks restructuring the council. The old regime, those who had betrayed my family, were either exiled or stripped of their power. But I needed more than just loyalty. I needed the kingdom to be a well-oiled machine, where every noble understood their role, not as overlords, but as partners in this new age. "You are no longer just my council," I began, my voice steady. "You are the guardians of this kingdom's future. You are the ones who will see that the common people thrive, and you are the ones who will ensure that the law is upheld." I turned my gaze to Lord Malvin, who had once been an enemy in my rise to the throne. His face, once smug, now bore a look of submission. "Lord Malvin," I said, addressing him directly, "you will no longer have power over the common folk. Your title as an advisor is gone. You will answer to me, as I answer to the people." The room fell silent. The other nobles glanced at each other, but I could see the fear in their eyes. They realized now that I had replaced the old order with a system that demanded accountability, and that was something none of them had expected from a woman. "The reforms will start immediately," I continued. "We will increase our military defenses to protect the borders, but we will also focus on infrastructure, roads, farms, and markets. This kingdom will stand strong, Not just in times of war, but in times of peace. Lord Malvin's face twisted with displeasure, but he said nothing. His game was over. I had already secured my hold on the nobility, and they would have to earn their place in my reign. The north, where the rebellion had started, remained a hotbed of potential conflict. House Varick had lost its power, but Livia's supporters were still a threat. They would not simply fade into the shadows. I sent Serena to the north, to meet with the remaining nobles, and ensure that peace would be maintained. She was my trusted ally, and I knew she could handle the delicate diplomacy required to prevent any further bloodshed. Meanwhile, I received word from Lady Seraphine Arden, who had continued to rally her supporters. Her loyalty had been invaluable, and now she was ready to take her place as a true ally in the kingdom's rebuilding efforts. "Your Majesty," Seraphine wrote in her letter, "the northern lands are weary, but they are ready to follow a strong leader. With your reforms, you will have their loyalty." Her words were comforting, but the reality of the northern territories was harsh. I knew that while the threat from Lord Barrick's army had dissipated, I would need to show the people in the north that I wasn't just a ruler who sat on a throne. I was a queen who would walk beside them, work beside them, and fight for them. I prepared to travel to the northern borders myself, to show them that I was not just the queen of the capital, but the queen of all the kingdom. As the weeks turned into months, the kingdom began to transform. The cities flourished, the markets thrived, and the people, once weary and broken, began to trust in their queen again. My name was no longer whispered in fear, it was spoken with respect. But as my power grew, so did the weight of the crown. I was no longer just a queen, I was the mother of a kingdom. I had to think beyond today, beyond tomorrow. I had to think about the future. The court was still filled with political games, but they no longer held the power to threaten me. I had already ensured that the military, the nobles, and the common people would stand by me. And now, I would focus on securing the future of the Lin Empire. The final step in my plan for the kingdom's future was to establish a line of succession. I had no children of my own. Yet. But I knew that in order to build a lasting legacy, I had to ensure that the throne would remain secure after my reign. I looked to Serena, who had always been a loyal advisor and confidant. "Serena," I said one evening, "I need to ensure the future of this kingdom. It cannot rest solely on my shoulders. I need someone to carry my vision forward." Serena smiled gently, understanding the depth of my decision. "You are thinking of the future, Your Majesty," she said. "And that is the most important thing." I knew she was right. The kingdom was not just mine, it was a gift that I would pass on, one that would live far beyond my reign. As I stood on the balcony looking out over the capital, I knew that my journey had come full circle. The woman who had once been betrayed, cast aside, was now the queen of a flourishing kingdom. I had rebuilt it. And now I would leave it as a legacy for the ages. I had won. And the kingdom that I had fought for would never fall into the hands of those who sought to destroy it. A throne is not just a seat of power. It is a symbol of all that has been fought for, and all that will be fought for in the future. A queen does not inherit the throne. She forges it, molds it with her own hands, and carves out a destiny from the stone of the world. When I first ascended to the throne, I had been consumed by anger and revenge, but in the years that followed, I understood that power was not a weapon to be used out of spite. It was a tool, one that could build empires, heal wounds, and shape the future. And now, as I stand on the precipice of a new era, I see the kingdom I have worked so tirelessly to rebuild, and I know that it is no longer just my kingdom. It is the kingdom of my people. The streets of the capital, once torn apart by war and rebellion, were now alive with prosperity. The markets were filled with merchants from distant lands, the sound of their wares ringing through the air. Children played in the streets, laughing in a world free of fear, free of the bitterness that had once consumed us. The people, once afraid of their queen, now sang her praises. They saw not just the queen who had crushed their enemies, but the queen who had rebuilt their world. My reign had not been one of conquest, it had been one of reconstruction. I stood in the center of the city, watching the transformation unfold. It was a different world than the one I had once known. And in it, I could see the legacy of my sacrifice, my strength, and my resolve. I had returned to the world that had broken me, and in doing so, I had rebuilt it stronger than before. The people who had once sworn allegiance to my father, who had whispered behind my back, now pledged themselves to me. I had not only gained their loyalty, I had earned their respect. Lady Seraphine Arden, my greatest ally, stood by me, a constant reminder of the importance of the bonds we forged during the darkest times. She had become my closest advisor, and together, we had transformed the kingdom into a beacon of hope. "Your Majesty," she said one day, as we walked through the royal gardens, "the kingdom is flourishing. You have done what no one thought possible." I glanced at her, my mind lost in thought. "It was never about me," I said quietly. "It was about giving the people what they deserve, a future. A world free from corruption, from betrayal, from fear." Seraphine smiled warmly, her eyes filled with pride. "And you've given them that. The kingdom will remember you, Isabel. Your name will be etched in history." I nodded, though my mind drifted to what came next. The future. The legacy I would leave behind. The kingdom needed to be secure long after my reign, and for that, I needed to ensure that the next generation would carry the torch. I had no children of my own, but that didn't mean the legacy would die with me. As the years passed, I began to see a new generation rise within the court, one that would carry the mantle of leadership. Serena's son, Tiberius, had grown into a young man of exceptional intellect. He had always been loyal, his sharp mind a reflection of his mother's guidance. And it was clear that he had the potential to be a great leader in his own right. I knew it was time to prepare him for the future. Tiberius would one day take the reins, but he would not do so unprepared. "Tiberius," I said one evening, as I sat with him in the royal chambers, "you have watched me rule, and now it is time for you to understand what it truly means to be a queen and a king." He looked at me with earnest eyes, nodding in understanding. "I will serve this kingdom, Your Majesty," he said, his voice steady. "I will carry your legacy forward." I smiled softly, feeling a weight lift from my chest. The future would be in good hands. But even as I made plans for the future, I knew that there were still forces who would seek to challenge me. Lord Berwick, though defeated, was not the only rival I would face. The council, while largely loyal, still contained whispers of dissent. There would always be those who saw my rise as a threat to their own ambitions. But I was no longer afraid of challenges. I had faced betrayal, loss, and near destruction. The crown had been nearly taken from me, but I had always taken it back. The true test of leadership was not in the battles you fought, but in the peace you built afterward. And I had built something that would endure, not just because of my power, but because of the trust I had earned from those who truly mattered. I stood one last time on the balcony, overlooking the kingdom. The city was alive with light, the fires of rebellion long extinguished, and the path ahead stretched out before me. I had won. The battles were over. But the kingdom would live on, and it would be my legacy. Years later, when the story of my reign was told, it would not be a story of conquest. It would not be a story of bloodshed and betrayal. It would be the story of a woman who had been broken, betrayed, and cast aside, but who, through sheer determination, had rebuilt an empire from the ashes. The people would remember me not just as a queen, but as the woman who had given them hope, who had restored the kingdom, and who had built a future that would endure for generations to come. As the sun set on my reign, I knew that the throne would not just be a symbol of power, but a symbol of what I had created, a kingdom that would stand unbroken, no matter what storms lay ahead. And I, Queen Brielle Evren, would always be remembered as the woman who had reborn a kingdom and made it stronger than ever before.